Hello and welcome to today's BPF Futures podcast. I'm Andrew Teacher, founder at Blackstock Consulting, and I'm here with Amanda Clack, who's Head of Strategic Advisory for CBRE, and Chris Grigg, who's Chief Executive of British Land.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
So we're here to talk about BPF Futures. It's BPF Futures' first anniversary. Unfortunately, we were told by security on the way in that the birthday cake and candles had to remain outside because of the fire regulations. So we don't have the birthday cake, but we do have a lot of fantastic work that's been done over the last year, bringing in many of the industry's brightest young talent and wrapping them into a lot of the fantastic work that the British Property Federation does, engaging with government and shaping the future of the real estate industry's policy agenda. And Amanda, obviously, you've been involved with the RSES for a number of years, and in your current role, you're looking at a number of areas of disruption. And how have you seen the market change throughout your career, and what are some of the most exciting things that you're involved with right now?
Well, I think in terms of my career, particularly kind of looking back over 30 years, I can literally remember when the first fax machine came into the office, and we got the fax machine, and then we got excited trying to find somebody else who had a fax machine that we could send a fax to. And when you see the pace of the
that's the thing with 140 characters on a sheet of paper, is it?
It is. And when you think now, it's like we don't have a fax machine, and the pace of change around email and just literally how technology has just become normalised in everybody's life in terms of the working life. I think that's been fantastic. And, it's just now how that technology can be used to help both influence the built environment and also be built into it in terms of future-proofing it. And I think that's incredibly exciting.
And in terms of the people that you're looking and you see forming that foundation, they're going to have to come from a different sort of background, aren't they?
They are, and I think that's where BPF Futures is really important, because it's actually understanding what that next generation of property professional really wants to bring in and what they're seeing and they're using, so that we can start to embrace that in real time.
And Chris Grigg, British Land has obviously been at the forefront of change in a number of areas over the last few years, and you've seen immense change during your tenure. And what have been some of the highlights?
Well, I think the first thing to say is I agree with you. I think the Futures effort by the BPF has just been a terrific thing. I think it'll be something that the industry will see or get dividends from for years to come, maybe even decades to come. And I think it's terrific for everybody who's worked on it. For me, and I've been in the industry for more than 9 years, I would say we have seen all sorts of change. Certainly at British Land, we started to see a real cultural change, much broader range of people involved, and I mean broader in all sorts of senses of that word. Dare one almost use the diversity word, but I think just as important as that is the whole way that the industry is having to change, and at its heart, that's about thinking more clearly about our customers, what our customers want, and how they're changing. And of course, a lot of that itself is a function of technology, and that's just driving behavioural change. Those are big shifts.
And the nature of customers, and customers not even a word that used to be used. I mean, pre-2008, you would never hear that word used. It was all tenants. And the nature of customers is changing, because obviously companies, developers are now becoming operators of office space as well as landlords, aren't they?
Yeah, certainly you're right. I mean, when I arrived at the beginning of 2009 and started talking about customers, there were people looking at me in quite a strange way. You might argue that hasn't changed, but at least they're for different reasons. I think for us, that journey has been, you can argue, has been twofold. We've thought to have more continuous discussion with our occupiers. That's something that's relatively new, lots of reasons for that shift. But secondly, we're thinking as much about the people who are actually in those offices, those people who are shopping, and not just the people who are signing the leases. That is a change. It sounds a bit technical, but at its heart, it is driving, in my view, quite a profound change in what the industry is all about.
And that's where technology can actually really help, Andrew, as well, because if you can get the technology to help provide the information around how customers are actually using the space, it really gives you a unique insight into what they're thinking, how long they're staying somewhere, where they're travelling from to get there, what their demographic profile is. And I think if you understand that, then for people like Chris, you can kind of really start to build that into your future thinking.
So it's about using your experience to provide analysis rather than being there hoovering up loads of data, which is obviously, I suppose, historically what advisors would have done.
Yeah, and you know, so much data is generated. I think it was there's a really great statistic that half of the world's data was literally created last year, but only 0.8% of it was analysed. And the really smart bit is getting the right data, getting the right analysis, and then interpreting it in the right way to make the right decisions.
So, Chris Grigg, in terms of the people that you'll be looking to bring into the business, or when you future gaze and you see what British Land could look like 10, 20 years down the line, from what Amanda's saying, it seems like there's going to be a much greater focus on techies and coders and people from a digital background rather than the conventional surveying route, which many come through Reading and other such colleges. Is that something you think about when we talk about the D word?
I think I would say yes, but I think we have to be careful not just to kind of wave coding or tech as some kind of green card that enables people suddenly to be successful in this industry. I think there's definitely absolutely going to be a need for a wider set of skills. It doesn't mean that surveyors won't be important. It doesn't mean that accountants won't be an important part of what we do. I do think, however, that we're going to need people who have a wider range of skills. But remember, if I'm right about the customer bit, and as Amanda says, then actually it's the soft skills that become even more important.
So the empathy, the psychology,
all that stuff becomes a critical part. It's not the only part, but if you have people who only think about buildings in terms of square feet, that is in itself has the potential to be a kind of blind alley, you might argue. But equally, if you've only got coders and nobody to interpret what they're doing, same sort of problem. So I think it's that mix of skills, that mix of experiences, which is going to, as I say, is already shifting the type of place that British Land is and many of our peers and competitors. And that's true right around the world. It's not just true in the UK. If you talk to big landlords in different parts of the world, they're all struggling with this same discussion, what it means, how they structure their organisations. Because remember, there are a whole set of consequences for this in terms of the types of organisation that allow greater diversity of skill set, let alone anything else, to thrive. People are not going to want to come into an organisation that thinks that all that's important is that which gets taught at Reading or, taught by the big accountants.
How do, as a listed company, how do you square that with the, your principal aim, which is obviously to keep the shareholders happy? How do you balance these things out?
I mean, in that particular regard, I don't think there's any balancing to do. I think that set of issues will be as true in a private company as a public company. We may have it on a slightly bigger scale than some.
You're certainly scrutinised a lot more. But I mean, for example, when you took a very visible lead recently in terms of shared parental leave, and that was something that really helped British Land stand out as putting its dollar where its mouth was in terms of that whole.
That's right, and we were very pleased with the reaction we got with that. Frankly, in two ways. Internally, it made a big difference, which was, after all, really what we were intending. But externally, I think that the flip side of this is you have to be more thoughtful about how you make your organisation one that can attract the best people and retain them. And what we find is that people coming into the workforce hesitant about using any of the kind of millennial or Gen X or whatever, but as the people that we're employing today want different things from their employment experience than they wanted even 5 and certainly 10, let alone 20 years ago. And our job is to make sure that we're thoughtful about that.
And there's a couple of things just to build on that, because I think if I look back to some work we did as RICS in 2014, which was looking at our changing world, let's be ready, so looking forward, future gazing to 2030, the number one concern that was coming out from employers was how do they tackle the war for talent and how do they get the best people into the organisation going forward, which is exactly sort of things like Chris was talking about. But equally for professionals, it was how do I stay relevant? And that's all about embracing technology. And I think that really plays into the workplace of the future. So we've done some work at CBRE looking at Portfolio 2040 and what's that going to mean in terms of how people work and where they work. And I think, the one thing you can predict is that the workplace is changing, and you're going to see much, much more flexibility built into that. And equally, you're going to see more of a trophy office space that's a higher quality, lot more collaboration space. So that's effectively why people will come to work. Actually, you can work anywhere. So you can work in your Costa Coffee, you can work in your home, you can choose where you want to work. But actually coming to the office will be more about actually collaborating and sharing ideas.
And in terms of, I suppose, some of the ideas that have shaped you both, Chris, Grigg, tell us about what was the best piece of advice you've been given early on in your career? If there were sort of one or two things that you could.
I was trying to think, what those two things were, and over a long career you get a plethora of advice. Some of it seems good at the time, some of it seems terrible at the time. You look back and some of it wasn't the same as you thought in terms of quality or application. But if I were to boil it down to two things, one of my bosses a long time ago said to me, always belong yourself. In other words, you have to believe in yourself and don't do yourself down, because there are enough people in the world who will do that for you. You've got to believe in yourself. And I think that's great advice. I'd give it to anybody. The other piece of advice, which was a throwaway line, but I was always liked, which was don't mess up. And that sounds very trite, but it is still quite important to remember in any part of your job that day when you're not fully concentrating, you do something stupid, you do something irrelevant, or just, can be damaging. It usually isn't, but just being thoughtful.
What do you do when you do mess up? How would you advise people to deal with that? Well, what is the best way? If you screw up somehow, what should you do?
I think the always true advice is be straight about it. Don't cover it up. I mean, that's the only really important piece of advice. If you look at where proper career or company disasters start, they usually start and maybe get further via some form of cover-up. That can be very grandiose, or it just can be a careless, no, I wasn't there at the time, or no, it wasn't really my fault, Gov, or whatever. That's the biggest thing, because if that happens, the chances are you will get found out. And then it's always worse than it started, and often those things have a way of snowballing. So I think that's the most important thing. Just be straight about it. And the other thing, which is actually as important in my view, is just learn from it. Stupidity is repeating the same old mistake. And I think we'll all make mistakes, but I think
stupidity and madness, I think, as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, both those things. But if you can make sure you learn from the mistakes, which you will surely make.
And what's been the most meaningful mistake you've learned from? In any role, not necessarily in the current one.
I think that's I think the great thing about a long career is you've had the opportunity to make lots and lots of mistakes and to learn from them. I guess when I was in a transactional environment long ago in the derivatives business, which I did long before I came into real estate, I made a mistake that lost us quite a lot of money, and that just then, it's in the derivatives business, you can lose money very, very quickly. And that is a moment where your kind of career, was such as it was then, passes in front of you, which is never a particularly pleasant experience. And then the second thing is, you really, really work hard not to do that again. And I think that comes back to what I was saying about trying not to make the same mistake. It's a very acute way of learning.
Yeah, no, well, it sounds like you seem to recover okay, given where you are. So
it didn't feel that way for a while, but
no, but I suppose that's character shaping kind of stuff, isn't it? I mean, Amanda Clack, tell us about some of the, who's been the most inspirational figure that you've worked with? I mean, you've been at some very large advisory firms, haven't you?
I have, and I think probably one of the people that I would say helped shape my career in a number of ways was a speechwriter for Margaret Thatcher that I worked with in government. And he was a fabulous gentleman and actually really taught me how to write. He had a really fantastic way of just adding a number of words and shaping what I'd already written. I was writing business cases going into Treasury and Cabinet Office. And he would just change the subtlety of a number of key words and would really add impact. But he would always recognise that people write in different styles, and it's important to embrace that difference. So he wouldn't fundamentally change what I'd written. And I've used that a lot in my own management style to kind of recognise people have different styles of doing things. And if you can just add a small amount of value to that, that's really important.
But the crucialness is the crucial thing is being able to communicate very, very clearly.
Yeah.
And closing, we've sort of been closing our conversation, Chris Grigg. If you could offer, one really piece of strong advice to the BPF Futures community over the next year, what would that be? What's one thing they can look to do that will help kind of put them on their way and help engage them with some of what the BPF's doing and what the industry's doing and some of the change that we're seeing around us?
It's a tough question to give one piece of advice, but I would say maybe what we're talking about is an industry and a world that is just changing more quickly, and therefore I think keeping an open mind and kind of going with the flow and trying to think about all the information that's coming into you. Where do I want to go? What's the next big sector? Rather than just getting stuck in a rut. I think that applies to people. I've been lucky enough to change career a couple of times, and I think that is all about thinking, this doesn't feel so good, I'm going to move, or that sounds really interesting, I'm just going to go and give that a go. That just give it a go because it feels of the moment, I think is something that can work really well for people.
And Amanda Clack, what would be your piece of advice be to a younger self?
I would say on that same question, get involved and don't be afraid to have a voice, because I think if ever there was a time where we need to be listening to that next generation, so BPF Futures being really key in that, is actually it's about speaking up.
I was going to say speaking up.
Because your opinion really matters, and it's never mattered more than it does now.
So speaking up, be heard, and crucially, Chris
Get
Grigg,
involved.
Don't mess up.
Exactly. But it's better to be heard and recognise that from time to time you will mess up. It's the be heard thing I think is critical.
Well, that's fantastic. Look, thank you very much, Amanda Clack from CBRE and Chris Grigg from British Land, and I'm Andrew Teacher from Blackstock.